welcome to another Zoo Notable. I'm PJ with ZooFit, and this time we're going to be discussing the wonderful world of Temple Grandin with animals in translation. We're going to kick things off with a quote from the book. Looking at those animals, I realized that none of them would even exist if humans hadn't bred them into being. And ever since that moment, I've believed that we brought these animals here, so we're responsible for them. We owe them a decent life and a decent death, and their lives should be as low stress as possible. Now, if you are in the animal care field, it is unlikely you haven't heard the name Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin is a brilliant animal welfare specialist who has revolutionized the way livestock are handled around the globe. She is a professor of animal science at this Colorado State University, and she holds a PhD in animal science from the University of Illinois. Dr. Grandin also happens to be autistic, and while she struggled to learn throughout her life, she realized that those struggles had made her uniquely adept to working with animals. Now, Animals in Translation is Temple Grandin's first animal-focused book. She's written dozens of books about autism and helping parents with kids with autism. But this was her first one, written in 2005, focusing on animals, and was followed up by Animals Make Us Human in 2009. Now, I've read her amazing books, and I even met her at a zookeeper conference, and her work just has absolutely floored me with her intuitive approach to dealing and working with animals. So when I dove into this book to read as a Zoo Notable, I figured I'd be sharing some great insights on animal welfare, and then maybe a little bit of how these can apply to our own lives, kind of like when I did Karen Pryor's Lads Before the Wind. But little did I realize how much incredible insights I'd receive on a much broader scale, some that actually have very little to do with animal welfare, although there is some relation. But I am already getting ahead of myself. Let's dive into this wonderful gem, Animals in Translation by Dr. Temple Grandin. Our first big idea is everyone is a genius. And I quote, Dr. Pepperberg used a different branch of behaviorism called social modeling theory to teach Alex, an African gray parrot. This theory stated that most animals learned by observing, not trial and error. Instead of teaching Alex directly, Dr. Pepperberg taught her research assistant while Alex sat on his perch and watched. And she also used highly desirable items to a parrot, crunchy pieces of bark, for her learning materials. And if Dr. Pepperberg wanted Alex to learn a color blue, she took a piece of tempting bark and painted it blue. And then she'd sit down with Alex and her research assistant and ask the assistant, what color? The right answer meant the assistant got to play with the bark. Wrong answers meant he didn't get the reward. All Alex had to do was watch. Now, using this approach was a breakthrough. Alex learned so much that he started asking questions on his own. One day, he looked at his reflection in the mirror and asked, what color? Alex was never taught to ask questions. He just did so on his own, spontaneously. Now, that's from a chapter called How Animals Think. And if you've never read the amazing breakthrough research done by Dr. Pepperberg and Alex, I highly recommend her book, Alex and Me, where she goes into the beautiful details of teaching Alex through social modeling and how Alex turned the behavior research world on its head with his innovative and, genius mind. And it's easy to say that Alex was a special case, and even Dr. Pepperberg agreed he was a special bird. However, that doesn't diminish the genius behind the bird. In Animals in Translation, Temple argues how all animals are smart in their own right. They often have superhuman skills that we can only dream of. Echolocation, anyone? As Temple puts it, animals have animal genius. Birds are navigation geniuses. Dogs are smelling geniuses. Eagles are visual geniuses. And honestly, we can say the same for people. This reminds me of the quote attributed to Albert Einstein, everyone is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. And as Peter Drucker, author of The Effective Executive, would put it, what are your strengths? What are you a genius at? Focus on those, celebrating them and owning them. Work hard on those strengths and you won't have to worry about any weaknesses. They'll become irrelevant. So where are you a genius? If you haven't thought about it or you think you don't have genius, stop and consider it. Are you going at a problem the same way everyone else has done it? Try something completely different, something more true to yourself, and find the genius mind hiding within. Then let your genius shine out. Now that we've discussed our genius, let's talk about big idea number 2. Are we turning into rapist roosters? Okay, just hear me out and let me explain the rapist roosters. As Dr. Grandin puts it in her book, when I was just starting my work with chickens a few years ago, I visited a chicken farm. And inside the barn where all the chickens lived, I found a dead hen lying on the floor. She was all cut up and her body was fresh. I went back to the farmer and asked, "What was that?" He told me the rooster did it. The rooster killed the hen. He acted like this was a perfectly normal thing for a rooster to do. I knew that couldn't be right. If roosters killed hen in nature, there wouldn't be any chickens. The chicken farmer told me that half of his roosters were rapist murderers. I was stunned. There is no species alive in nature where half the males kill reproductive age females. There had to be something seriously wrong with those birds. And speaking to colleagues and friends, I discovered the source. Ian Duncan from the University of Guelph in Canada had studied roosters and found that half of the rooster courtship program had gotten accidentally deleted in about half of the birds as a result of single trait or selective breeding. Now, a normal rooster does a courtship dance before trying to mate with a hen. And this is an instinctual dance that triggers a separate instinctual reaction in the hen's brain as she crouches down into a sexually receptive position so the rooster can mount her. She doesn't crouch unless she sees that dance. But half of these roosters had stopped doing the dance, which meant that the hens had stopped crouching down for them. So the roosters became rapists. They jumped on the hens and tried to mate them by force. And when the hen tried to get away, the rooster would attack her with his spurs and slash her to death. Now, my first gut reaction to this eye-opening story was to talk about how we are messing with the food chain in horrific ways. But whatever we were doing to chickens' genes is actually besides the point. It's this next part that Temple mentions which waves some red flags to me. The really bad thing was that this change happened slowly enough that the farmers and breeder colonies didn't realize they were creating monsters. Nobody noticed what was happening. As the roosters got more and more aggressive, the humans unconsciously adjusted their perceptions of how a normal rooster should act. It was the case of the bad becoming normal. Now, this reminds me of the Indian philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti, who said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Now, our society has gotten accustomed to all sorts of new gadgets, new technology, food products, blue lights, sleep deprivation, plastic packaging, and breaking away from nature in general. Only these advances have other side effects. Yes, technology allows us to continue working from home or connecting to friends and family across the country. But what are some of the other changes in our lives as a result of so much stimuli? Now, Alberto Villoldo wrote in his book, One Spirit Medicine, from television and internet alone, we are exposed to more stimuli in a week than our Paleolithic ancestors were exposed to in a lifetime. Guys, this is insane. Our brains aren't meant to deal with so much inputs all at once. Like a gazelle in the Serengeti, our brains are meant to deal with one lion roaring at us at a time. But in today's culture, we are instead dealing with the entire jungle attacking us. And we forget the ways our bodies and our brains were built to move in ways that we just don't move anymore. We ignore the cycles in nature because we stay indoors, on computers, unable to sleep because of blue lights permeating our eyes, keeping us awake, but dulling our senses and creating, as Dr. Grandin might put it, monsters. And we don't notice these changes because no one is looking for them. In an old study called Gorillas in Our Midst, researchers asked participants to watch how many basketball passes a team in white made in a videotape. And afterwards, instead of asking how many passes did they see, they asked how many people saw the gorilla walking in, a person in a gorilla suit walking into the game, beating their chest, and then walking out. 50% didn't see the gorilla. It's because they didn't expect to see the gorilla. We don't expect to see the side effects, and if they happen over time, we never realizing that the bad is becoming the normal. We don't recognize the gorilla in the suit in the middle of a basketball game. Now, if you put a frog in boiling water, it's going to hop out because it's hot. But if you gradually turn up the heat, the water with the frog in it, the frog will stay in, and because it's so gradual, it becomes the new norm, even within moments. So what is our new normal? Is it supposed to be normal to be completely overwhelmed by all the stimuli coming at us? Or to only get by 5 or 6 hours of sleep every night? This isn't just the way it is. This is the bad becoming normal, and the end result could be just as devastating as roosters turning into rapists. So big idea number 3 is our brains are meant for moving, or lessons from a sea squirt. And the idea of us changing our ways without noticing how bad things are getting is really disconcerting. This new trend, or more like lifestyle, of being addicted to technology, our phones, and constant stimulation is very damaging to our brains and our bodies, because we basically have a brain so we can move. The brain evolved in creatures to help them move around without knocking into things. As Rodolfo Linnaeus explains, the sea squirt is a primitive organism that starts out in life looking something like a tadpole with about 300 brain cells. It ends up more like a turnip. The first day of its life, the sea squirt swims around until it finds its permanent home. Once it finds its spot, it doesn't move again for the rest of its life. And here's the interesting part. While it is swimming, it has a primitive nervous system. But once it becomes attached to an object, it eats its own brain. Since the sea squirt isn't going to ever move again, it doesn't need a brain. An animal that eats its own brain, you know what else eats brains, right? Zombies. And being stuck in our phones, scrolling through social media, disconnecting from nature and our loved ones, we're setting ourselves up to be a zombie, or more accurately, a sea squirt society. We might as well absorb and eat our own brains with the amount of moving we're doing. And the moral of the sea squirt story is, we have brains so we can move. If we didn't move, we wouldn't need brains and we wouldn't have them. Now, most of the people I interact with, the zookeepers, animal care staff, and fitness professionals, don't necessarily have this issue on a literal sense. But just because movement isn't an issue for you at work doesn't mean that we're in the clear. Metaphorically speaking, we should always be moving forward towards your goals, your dreams, improving your skills, improving animal welfare, and making the world a better place. And as Brian Johnson from the Optimized program states so frequently from his coach Phil Stutz, we are never going to be exonerated. We are always going to have something to work towards. We're never going to be the best because standards will always shift and ways will always improve. And according to George Leonard in his book Mastery, we can be relieved and excited about this idea. As he puts it, for a master, the rewards gained along the way are fine, but they are not the main reason for the journey. Ultimately, the master and the master's path are one. And if the traveler is fortunate, that is, if the path is complex and profound enough, the destination is 2 miles farther away for every mile he or she travels. So yes, we must keep moving forward, physically, literally, and progressing toward our goal, our dreams, and keep striving to be the best versions of ourselves. So let's connect to the earth, our loved ones, and even ourselves in a healthy and positive way. Use the brain for its true purpose and keep moving today, tomorrow, and forever. will round off this Zoo Notable with our fourth big idea: animals make us human. I quote, Aborigines have a saying, dogs make us human. And now we know that's probably literally true. People wouldn't have become who we are today if we hadn't co-evolved with dogs. I think it's also true that all animals make us human. That's why I hope we'll start to think more respectfully about animal intelligence and talent. That would be good for people because there are a lot of things that we can't do that animals can. We could use their help. Now that's from Temple Grandin's last chapter in Animals in Translation called Animal Genius and Extreme Talents. And Dr. Grandin shared some really interesting information about how our early ancestors became the modern humans basically because of their coexistence with wolves. And before partnering with wolves, anthropologists believed that humans behaved a lot more like other primates. Humans were not nearly as social as we are today. They stayed in family groups, but never had non-kin friendships. They were solitary hunters, normally going after much smaller animals to feed just themselves or their family. And before wolves, humans were nomadic, not very territorial. However, all of those are characteristics of wolves. So anthropologists believe that these early years of partnering with wolves, wasn't a dominant species domesticating a subordinate species. They were actually considered to be on equal ground. Basically, two different species with complementary skills teamed up together, something that has never happened before and has never happened since. And the other thing that they believe is that early humans began to take on more wolf-like behaviors, hunting in groups, staying in general region and establishing territory, and forming friendships outside their immediate family. So it's not just that we turned wolves into dogs. Wolves actually had a hand in domesticating people. Humans co-evolved with wolves. We changed them, and they changed us. And we're just scraping the surface of what animals are capable of doing, both for their own sake and to benefit our own lives. To this extent, we are responsible for caring for them and the planet because they are an integral part of our lives, from the food we eat to even how we became the humans we are today. Without animals, there would be no people. And even if there were people, what kind of people would we be? As Temple Grandin said earlier, we do owe animals a decent life and a decent death, as happy and healthy as we want our own lives to be. Let's foster that relationship with animals and each other with love, respect, and compassion. Now that's all I've got from Temple Grandin's book, Animals in Translation. If these ideas resonated with you, I highly recommend this book and her other book, Animals Make Us Human. You can learn more about Dr. Grandin at templegrandin.com. And as a prominent author and speaker on both autism and animal behavior, she has been featured in many nationally recognized programs. And if you haven't seen it already, there is also an Emmy Award-winning movie about her life. And thanks for joining me for another Zoo Notable. What big idea resonated with you the most? What ideas will you start working on to improve your life? Take care of yourself so we can be a better service to our animals, our community, and the planet. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.